So today's topic of focus is fast moves, EPS ones, DPS ones. And if you're not familiar, it's EPS, energy per second, which is like how fast you can accelerate to your charge move. And then DPS is just like raw damage. There are a couple Pokemon in the game where using an EPS move versus a DPS move is like an area of controversy. The more popular one would be Mewtwo, because, you know, confusion versus Psycho Cut. And then another Pokemon with this whole EPS, DPS kind of controversy is Gengar. If you consider Shadow Claw, that just settles the deal. Shadow Claw is just so unbelievably good. It's believably good. We see it be good, right? It just blows Hex and Sucker Punch like out of the club. But that's a legacy move, right? So the unfortunate souls that are stuck with Sucker Punch and Hex Gengars, well, they want to know which move's better. They're usually about the same, but if you look at certain matchups, certain simulations, stuff like that, you know, you'll see that there's like a pretty sizable difference between them sometimes, and then other times they're about the same. So what's the real? What's going on? Which moves are the better for the Gengar in that respect? And then kind of translating that into other aspects of the game, right? Like in general, the EPS moves versus the DPS moves. And I will say it's not always that clear cut. There are some moves that are like omni, right? They're just good at everything. Like something like Dragon Tail is a good example of that, where it's just generally better all the time, right? And then Shadow Claw, as we mentioned, as in all the selves of me that are here right now. Alright, so hey, look, it's this guy again. It's the DPS TDO comprehensive ranking sheet from Bioweapon, right? I just love using this. Let's look at Mewtwo. So if you're unfamiliar what comprehensive DPS and TDO is, well, DPS is damage per second. TDO is total damage output, which is the amount of damage you deal on average before fainting. Spreadsheets that you may be familiar with that are like this, like simple cycle DPS, a lot of people call it weave DPS, and it just considers like the energy gains you get from your fast move to launch one charge move cycle. Well, this considers the energy gains you get for your charge moves from taking damage and your personal bulk, and there's other like complicated metrics in it as well. Usually this is expressed in a range, but Bioweapon found a comprehensive, right? Yeah, no, nice average kind of pull from that range. So it's just like a general sort of nice snapshot of what you may actually experience with the Pokemon. Obviously, like in a particular matchup situation, you know, flavor of situation, things may be different. And I'll go over that. That comes up a lot with Gengar, way more with Gengar than when it comes up with Mewtwo. Mewtwo is pretty straightforward, so I'll make sure to highlight that for you guys, because simple spreadsheets that give you really easy outputs, they're really nice, but they don't tell you everything, right? Except this spreadsheet's pretty deadly, I will say, because you can put in the the defender types, and you can even put in what their attacks are, and like Bioweapon's been working on this, and I have not had enough time to play with absolutely everything on it, and it is really good. So if you haven't checked out this spreadsheet yet, I really do suggest it, particularly if you put in information for Rampardos. I'm going to bring that up when we get to the rock fast moves. Yeah, if Rampardos happens, Gen 4 Pokemon, and it gets Smackdown any kind, like Rampardos is already going to be the quote-unquote best DPS rock type. And a rock type fast move is just going to make them crazier. But we're not here to talk about that dinosaur yet. We're here to talk about Mewtwo. So let's stick to that. So Mewtwo's personal best DPS combination is Confusion and Shadow Ball. Close second is the Psycho Cut with the Shadow Ball. Boiling it down, without the consideration of being able to easily dodge, or you personally being able to easily dodge with one move or another, objectively, Confusion is the superior DPS move. But if you're attacking like a gym, for instance, they might be more beneficial to get to your Shadow Balls sooner. And if you're using Mewtwo to break down a Blissey, it might be better to get to your Focus Blasts sooner. And you'd be able to get to the Focus Blast sooner if you use the EPS move. Which of these two attacks, Psycho Cut and Confusion, really come down to what your matchup is and what charge move you're using. So if you're fighting a Machamp, then you're going to want to go with Psychic. That's going to be Mewtwo's best attack against a Machamp. And because Psychic is so poor on its own, and it's a single bar charge move, there really isn't going to be a trade-off between using Psycho Cut or Confusion that like one's better than the other in one situation or another. No, Confusion's just going to be straight up better against a Machamp than a Psycho Cut. Especially if you're using any other charge move too, because you want to get that super effective stab psychic type damage in, and you do that best with the Confusion. And as I already said, if you're in a matchup where the Shadow Ball is your main focus, or the Focus Blast is your main focus, and the psychic type damage isn't super effective, or better yet, if your psychic type damage is resisted, then you're definitely going to go with the Psycho Cut, because then the Psycho Cut will carry you to your charge moves way faster than Confusion would. So that's the skinny, that's the main difference between those two. So yeah, talking about getting to the charge moves faster, if you're up against the Laddie twins, or if you're using Mewtwo to counter Mewtwo, then yeah, you're definitely going to want to go with Psycho Cut to get them Shadow Balls, right? Because they're Psychic type, they're resisting your Psychic type attacks, so Confusion's DPS is wasted, squandered on that, and then Psycho Cut is going to get you to the heavy hits sooner. So that's basically how it goes for Mewtwo. Gengar is a little bit more interesting. Gonna get to that boy here. Yeah, intermission, you can watch me pour a cup of coffee. Me going off camera for coffee, you know? It's the quality content you came to this live stream for. So Gengar's really, Gengar's pretty interesting, and I don't know, interesting in Pokemon Go. What does that really translate into? Kind of a headache, right? It's really nice when you have the clear-cut choice. You know, the one good option, you don't even have to think about it. Yeah, and so Shadow Claw is way better. Yeah, we already know this, but Shadow Claw is not the reason why Gengar has this moveset debate. We already know that Shadow Claw is the best. We can't get Shadow Claw. We got Hex and Sucker Punch to deal with. The DPS, the comprehensive DPS and TDO and all that jazz are basically the same between them in this vacuum scenario. You got Hex with Shadow Ball, and that's 16.791. And then you got Sucker Punch with Shadow Ball, and that's 16.703 for DPS. It's that's 0.088 difference. That's not a difference that you're really gonna feel in reality. And the reality of the Gengar matchup is that with these two fast moves, what you do experience in reality is quite different than what you experience in this vacuum sealed simulation. One huge reason for that, one huge reason why this DPS EPS argument is so big for a Pokemon like Gengar is because Gengar is a glass cannon. A lot of its targets, Gengar is going to faint to very quickly. So getting that extra damage from Sucker Punch, the higher DPS move, or getting that extra energy from Hex, the higher EPS move, to fire off another Shadow Ball, that's a big deal for Gengar. Now you might not believe me because Gengar's Ghost and Poison type, not Dark type, but here's Gengar's page on Game Press, and here you can check more info about the fast moves. So you can see here that the DPS of Hex is 8.33 and the DPS for Sucker Punch is 10. So you're like, okay, but that doesn't include stab, right? And you can see the EPS differences, and you're like, okay, Hex has, one more EPS than, Sucker Punch does. So yeah, but the true DPS here, it considers the base attack of the Pokemon and a stab bonus or not. So for Sucker Punch, it's still outpacing it even without stab. You got 14.29 and 13.33. And it doesn't sound like it'd be that big of a deal in practice. You're like, oh, okay, that's like 1 DPS versus 1 EPS. Does that matter? For Gengar, it does. Sometimes, not all the time. A good example of this is if you checked out my content on Latios and Latias. Against Latias, it doesn't matter which one of these two fast moves you pick. I mean, as long as you're hitting the break point for them, all things being equal that regard, it doesn't matter which one you have. But against the Latios, between these two moves, the Sucker Punch is on average the better. And you're like, well, why is that? Why is it good there, not good there? Some matchups depending on the opponent's defense, Sucker Punch will hit a magic number where it goes from like 8 to 9, and Hex doesn't hit a breakpoint later because it's so weak and the Pokemon that you're up against has so much defense that you miss out on that. So then Hex gets left behind, and that's what happens for the most part in the Latios matchup. Now in other matchups you may find that Hex is outpacing Sucker Punch by a lot, and you're like, oh, what the H? You know, why are they even sometimes? Why is Hex better in this one? I thought Sucker Punch was going to be the better one because it can hit that higher DPS breakpoint. What's going on? Well, the reason why Hex would outpace Sucker Punch is there's that magic weird scenario, right, that occurs with glass cannon type Pokemon where you are just able to cross the finish line and get a charge move off reliably before getting smoked. And it doesn't happen all the time. Obviously, these are very niche situations, but where they exist, they always exist in a huge way, where it's like that couple extra energy per second just makes it so much more reliable to get that charge move. And in Pokemon Go, charge moves are everything, right? That it is very significant for them to run the higher EPS set. The best working example that I can really highlight for this is if you remember back when I talked about Ho-Oh, I did that random video where I talked about like a low-level Golem and how a low-level Golem has higher DPS and even TDO than certain higher-level iterations of Golem. And the reason being was because against the extra sensory Ho-Oh, it was able to dodge a defensive breakpoint. If you don't know about breakpoints and defensive breakpoints and energy gains from damage, the simple of it is that there's rounding involved. And if you get hit for so much damage from a fast move, you can gain like 2 energy from that, right? This is just simplifying it. But if you get to a certain breakpoint, and I think it's like you go from even to odd damage or odd to even, I always forget which one it is. You know, the integer changes, and because of that change, you now gain 1 less energy from getting hit by that attack, right? That really shouldn't matter, right? You think like, man, when does that matter? And there are very niche circumstantial scenarios where that does matter, but they're very few and far between, right? It's kind of where the whole like a 15-0-15 Pokemon's the best, which often isn't true, but sometimes is. But yeah, when you see that, it's like, wow, it just crosses the finish line. It is able to get a Stone Edge off on average before the Solar Beam hits it and kills it. Right, and that makes all the difference. And you'll see that with Hex Gengar too, where it crosses the finish line. That 1 extra EPS makes all the difference between like an extra Shadow Wall or not. Unlike Mewtwo, in this kind of scenario, it really is matchup per matchup. I can't give you like a blanket statement and say one's better in this scenario all the time, the other one's better in this scenario all the time. I mean, it's 1 in 1, right? But there are times where it's a big deal. For example, against Latios. So yeah, if you're preparing to use your Pokemon for any sort of matchup scenario, and it's like a controversial Pokemon like Sucker Punch versus Hex, Gengar, then always check out Pokebattler or Go Battle Sim and see what the real looks like, see what's going on, because it can be surprising. So that was a clip from my live stream SwagTips. SwagTips streams every Thursday on the Twitch channel SwagTips. I hinted at it a couple times in the video, but I also have some SmackDown Tyranitar content coming up, right? So if you're interested in seeing that, make sure to subscribe to the Swagman if you haven't already. If you have any questions on the topics that I covered today, then comment below and let me know, and I'll be happy to answer them. Also, I'd like to give a shout out to the Perfect League, right? You may have noticed, got one of these Perfect League pins on. Yeah, my genius has been recognized, and the Perfect League sent me some of their pins. So got the legendary pin here because y'all know I'm a freaking legend. I also made sure to get the level 40 Instinct pin because everyone needs to know that I'm on Team Instinct and level 40 at all times. I also got the Milotic pin. So yeah, thank you Perfect League for sending me these free pins. If you're curious about the Perfect League, they're not just a pin shop. They also do videos and tournaments, challenges like battling gyms, which team does it the fastest, battling raids, which team does it the fastest. So yeah, link to all their stuff in the description so you can check them out. SwagTips. Because y'all know I'm a freaking legend. Y'all know I'm a swag man.